Shimon Shetach. It's interesting. Shimon Shetach, just give you some historical background. There was a king who was not from the Davidic line. His name was Yanai. He was known as Janus. He Hellenized. It was during the Second Temple period. And he killed all the Chachamim. Why? Because they opposed him to be king. He himself, his father was a Kohen. His mother was taken captive. And the law is, rabbinically, if a woman's taken captive and there's a question, captive by non-Jews, they may have defiled her in captivity. She's not permitted to a Kohen, because a defiled woman is not permitted to a Kohen, and he was the child of such a woman. So therefore, he was not qualified to be a Kohen. He wore the vestments of the high priest, and he was criticized for it by the Chachamim. And they said, Yanai, remove the golden plate off your forehead, because it's not appropriate, because you're not qualified. He took it very personal, and he had a certain advisor who was an evil man. He said, look, you don't have to live with this guilt. Just kill all the Chachamim, all those who were opposed to you being what you want to be. Just wipe them out. Yanai's wife was the sister of Shimon Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the chief justice on the High Court of Israel. Shimon ben Shetach. Before he killed the Chachamim, before he wiped them out, he killed them. The law is, if a person's animal gores a person and kills a person, the law is the animal has to be put to death. Like today, I mean, even in secular world, if you go through a safari and a lion or any of the predator animals kill any of the people, they destroy the predator animal that took the life of a person. That's what they do. But there's a Torah law that the animal that kills a human being, kills a Jew, must be eliminated, must be stoned, put to death. However, the Torah tells us in truth, if the owner of that animal should have been more vigilant and more careful, and it could have been prevented from happening, really the owner of the animal is held accountable. However, the Torah says that he himself did not actually take the life. It was only due to his negligence. Therefore, the animal, when it's killed, the animal is in the place of the person. Now, when you judge a person for the death penalty, he must be present in court. So when the verdict was pronounced on a person's animal, which kills, the owner of the animal must be in court. There's no such thing as an abstentia. Person must be in court. What was the case? Yanai had a Canaanite slave. The Canaanite slave committed murder. So if the slave committed murder, he has to be put to death. But since the slave is the chattel of Yanai, he must be in court while they're deliberating whether he's innocent or guilty, and when they issued a verdict, guilty. So Yanai was in court. The king came to court as the king. Now, the law is that if a person is the defendant and witnesses testify, the defendant must stand before the judges. That's a Torah law. Out of respect, the defendant must stand before the judges. Yanai, being the king and being an arrogant, pompous, self-centered person, he sat, would not stand, did not stand. So Shimon Shetach, his brother-in-law, who was the chief justice of the High Court of Israel, says, Yanai, stand on your hind legs. Stand up on your feet. There's no one who's above the law. If you're the defendant, you must stand before the court, because the court represents God's presence. You must stand. So what happened? The judges of the Sanhedrin were intimidated by him. So when he gave the order he should stand, Yanai stares at the judges straight in the eye, and he turns to the right of the group, and they look down, and they're totally intimidated by him. Turns to the left, none of them stand. None of the judges stand. None of the judges evidently indicate he must stand. He stared them down. Shimon Shetach was upset. How do you disgrace God for a mortal king? If the law is you must stand, I mean, how are you so intimidated by this mortal that you don't demand what you represent? So it's a Shimon Shetach. He looked to the right, looked to the left, and God took out all the judges. All the judges of the Sanhedrin, they all died because they themselves actually participated in a public desecration of God's name. So God took them out. Just gives you a little bit of background of the relationship between Shimon Shetach and his brother Yanai. So the Mishnah tells us in Brochos, the man Yanai was such a ignoramus, was not a learned person, and they had a bench, and he didn't know how to lead the benching. Yeah, he didn't know how to lead. In those days, didn't have transliterated art scroll books. He didn't know how to lead the benching. So the wife of Yanai, I told you mentioned, it was the sister of Shimon Shetach. So she says to Yanai, so when he killed all the rabbis, all the chachamim, she sent her brother in hiding, and she hid him from her husband. Because if her husband would have found him, he would have put him to death also. But because his wife sent him to hiding, therefore he couldn't locate him. So she says to her husband, if you promise me you will not hurt my brother, I will bring him out of hiding, and he'll lead the benching for you. And he agreed. He agreed. So Shimon Shetach came out of hiding, and he led the benching on behalf of Yanai. So it's interesting. Here the man goes, kills all the rabbis, all the chachamim. He himself is an ignoramus. He doesn't even know how to lead the benching. But yet he wants a bench with a zimun. He wants to have it, to the degree he's looking for somebody to lead the benching. She has to get a guarantee from her husband that he's not going to harm her brother. He brings her brother out of hiding, and he leads the benching. So Shimon Shetach was a chief justice on the Sanhedrin. So he's the expert of the protocols of the court. Now, this law is a Torah law. We just read about last week's reading that were witnesses. The only evidence which is admissible in court is testimony of witnesses. That's the only evidence, which is if you want to extract money, if you want to put a person to death, to indicate his guilt, you have to have bona fide witnesses. And Torah sets the criteria what a bona fide witness is. But even if they are bona fide witnesses, there's always a chance maybe when they saw what they saw, they didn't see accurately. So the witnesses have to be interrogated. You have to ask them certain questions. It's called interrogating the witnesses. Of course, we want to make sure that the testimony there's no area of doubt in their minds that what they saw was accurate. So they put their feet to the fire, and they interrogate each witness individually. And if there's no discrepancy between both testimonies, the presumption is they saw it correctly. But if there's any discrepancy, evidently what one saw, the other one didn't see. If that's the case, you have to have minimally two witnesses testify to be credible evidence. So they would go interrogate them. Now, there's 7 questions which the court asks the witnesses, and which is the basis of interrogation. But if the court chooses to add other questions to make sure that the witnesses their testimony is accurate and they actually saw what was correct, what they claimed they saw, they ask other questions to see to what degree they were focused and paid attention. For instance, the Gemara tells us that one of the rabbis would ask them, the person claimed that the crime was committed under a palm tree. Under a palm tree. So they asked them the stems on the dates, exactly how large were they? How were they shaped? the question doesn't have to be asked. But if you ask the question and the witness cannot respond, the witness is disqualified. You don't ask the question, it's not a problem. But if the judge wants to really get to the bottom of it, make sure beyond any doubt that their testimony is accurate and they were fully focused on every aspect of the crime scene, they have a right to ask these questions. But you realize when you ask a question, like very often I'll ask a question on the Talmud, or whatever we ask, and I say, so what do you say? So the people, they try to answer it, but very often a question leads you to the answer. When you ask a certain question, I say, because I'm asking the question, that question should give you an indication of what the answer is. The question leads you to the answer. Sometimes when the judge interrogates the witness, if he's really wily and smart, he could figure out what the judge is after, what kind of answer he wants. He'll answer the question understanding exactly what the judge is looking for. But if that's the case, it's not a valid interrogation. Because if he could figure out what you're asking, the type of answer you want, so his response has no relevance to what? To validating his testimony. Because you've given it away exactly what answer you're looking for. So this is Shimon Shetach. Shimon Shetach Omer. Havi marbe lachros edim. You should increasingly interrogate the witnesses, meaning going beyond the 7 basic questions you have to ask. Because we want to make sure it's beyond any doubt that the person is guilty. However, if you ask more than the 7 basic questions, that means you're trying to figure out, is this testimony accurate beyond any doubt? However, if you ask more questions than are basically needed, but the judge should be very careful. The way he words those questions. Why? Shema bitocham yuldu l'shaker. Because as a result of the additional interrogation, from those questions, the witness will understand exactly how to lie. Because he'll pick up exactly what the judge is looking for, and he's going to respond to exactly the answer the judge is looking for. But factually, it's not. That was only a takeoff of what the judge was asking. Very often, I have a limited amount of time I teach. At certain times, a person asks a question. And when he starts asking, I know exactly the questions he's asking. Exactly. And as brilliant as he may be, I know the questions he's asking. And to save time, I want to answer the question even before he asks it. So the person gets a little upset. He says, Rabbi, let me finish talking. Let me finish asking the question. So I say to the person, I know exactly what's bothering you, and I'm going to address it. Let me ask my question. I say, you want to ask the question? Okay. Ask the question. I give the answer that I would have given. But again, you have to give people that do. You want to ask the question, ask the question. Okay? So very often when a person is about to ask a question, he hasn't even asked it. I know exactly where he's going. Or I see a person making a certain grimace when I say something. I understand exactly what exactly is bothering him, and I address what's bothering him, why that's not a basis to be bothered. Years ago, there's a person came from a very almost zero background. His father was a communist. Today, the person is probably close to 70 years old, and started to come to classes, and he never missed a class. Eventually, for whatever reason, I'm not sure where he is today. I think he checked out on Judaism, but he was very involved for a long time. He had a number of personal issues, what went on, tragedies in his life, and going back 30 years ago, the most asked question was, today, people don't ask that question. What about the Holocaust? That was always the retort. You could explain to them, what about the Holocaust? Where was God during the Holocaust? And that was always the question. And that was always the escape clause. If a person wanted to reject whatever is being presented to him, as cogent as it may be, but if you don't have an answer on the Holocaust, I'm not interested. That was always 30 years ago, this was. So this person used to attended many of my classes, and he was present when many people asked me this question. And he says to me, Rabbi, I want to ask you something. I've heard the question asked you multiple times, and I've heard at least 7 different answers. I mean, is there one answer or are there 7 answers? What is it? I said, every person, when he asks a question, he asks a question from his vantage point. So what will satisfy one person is not going to satisfy another person, because each person is bothered by something else, and the nuances of difference will make a difference what the answer is. I mean, all the answers are correct, but many answers are not going to be sufficient, not going to suffice to satisfy that person. So because I have a sense of when I just interact for a moment, I have a sense of where he's coming from. Therefore, I answer based on what's going to satisfy him to satisfy what's bothering him. That's the answer. So I'm just saying, I have a very strong sense of people. When people speak to me, immediately I have a sense of his personality, this, that, whatever it is. And therefore, I'm able to somehow to immediately respond to the question, whether he's wasting my time. I had a person many years ago at the Yad Avram. Larry used to come to the lectures once in a while. And the person got up and he just wanted to be paid attention to. And I used to shut him down immediately. I answered the question, he sat down. Other people, I spend more time answering questions. He came to me afterwards. And he says to me, Rabbi, other people, you give more time me. It's a moment that you shut me down. Why? I said, when you ask the question, you're not asking the question to have the answer. You're asking us to be heard. That should be acknowledged. I said, in this setting, I have no time to waste for your acknowledgement. That's the difference. People ask questions for different reasons. Witnesses have to be interrogated. The only evidence is the testimony of qualified witnesses, and the Torah sets the criteria. What's a qualified witness? What's not a qualified witness? And it says, and if the judge asks additional questions, it's something positive. However, he shouldn't lead the witness to understand what exactly he's getting at, because you're only going to teach the witness how to say something which is not true. We've said many times, the Torah begins with the appellation of God, which is Midas Adin, the attribute of justice. Elokim is the appellation for the attribute of justice. And then afterwards, we find the appellation of Yudke Vavke, which represents Rachmim, associated with Elokim, meaning that God, when he judges the world, it's coalesced with mercy. Why? So Rashi cites the Chazal, the Midrash, because God saw the world cannot tolerate the exactness and the precision of justice. Therefore, he coalesced into it the attribute of mercy. Because since man is prone to fail, we have many blind spots, and if he's going to reign in continuously with us, there's not going to be much of humanity left. Therefore, he interacts with the world within the context of the attribute of mercy. However, there's such a thing as a judicial system, and it's specifically the judicial system that was given to the Jewish people. One of the 7 Noahide laws is that even the non-Jewish court has to have a judicial system to assure that the laws that they're obligated to keep are kept. In addition, if they want to legislate other laws, the court, to maintain society, they're empowered by the Torah. That's their right. Whatever laws they want to institute. And the communities are bound to those laws that the court promulgates, legislates. That's even a non-Jewish court. However, a Jewish court, they also have rights. However, what's acceptable in the Jewish court, the testimony has to be much more compelling For instance, a single witness is not enough. A relative is not enough. A person has a conflict is not enough. You have to have so many judges. They have to be qualified. They have a certain degree of what? Of pedigree. They have to be ordained. The witnesses have to meet certain criteria, and they have to be interrogated. Specifically, minimally 7 questions have to be asked, and in addition, the judges should add other questions to ascertain with beyond any doubt that this is credible testimony. Why? Because the Jewish court, what does it represent? That's terrestrial justice. The world was created for who? Initially, it was created for all humanity. If Adam would have sinned of eating of the tree of knowledge, all humanity would have been the children, Adam's children, because Adam retains his status. The children are his children. Therefore, all the people who descend from Adam are God's children. But Adam, unfortunately, failed very seriously by eating of the tree of knowledge, and he was driven from the Garden of Eden. He lost his classification as Adam, the Jewish people, because we descend from Avram Avinu, who was the first human being to acknowledge God on his own. He's the founding father of the Jewish people. That's Avram. So the world now was created in whose behalf? Why does God carry this world? For 2 reasons. For this, the world was created for the sake of Torah, and because of Avram Avinu, who he was, and what he was able to bring about within himself, the levels of understanding within the realm of spirituality, we are the only nation qualified to receive the Torah. That's it. So who's going to be God's representation of truth, of justice on the terrestrial level? God himself is justice, but his justice is too exacting for man to survive it. So God gave over that concept of uncompromising truth to the human being. Which human being? The Jewish people. Because we represent him on the terrestrial level. As a result of that, you have to meet certain criteria within the context of the court. You need certain qualifications for the witnesses. You need 2 witnesses. If they're related, they're disqualified. If they have conflict, they're disqualified. You need 3 judges. They have to be ordained. If it's a capital case, you need 23 judges. And all these various aspects and protocols that relates exactly to bring about justice. And God says, I convene with the court. Every time the court convenes, and if they meet all the criteria that I set in place, I convene with them, meaning the verdict is always truthful. That's emes. So if you want to come to truth, you must ask minimally 7 questions during interrogation. But if the judges are not satisfied, they have a right to add any questions they want. And if the witnesses do not respond immediately, they're disqualified. Because you have to respond to the questions that the judges ask. Because what are they out to find out? Is this within the human context? Is this truth beyond question or not? So if it's not truth beyond any question, this is not a representation of God's justice on the celestial level, which now is on the terrestrial level. That's the concept. Therefore, Shimon Shetach says, who's the Chief Justice of the High Court of Israel, says, you should add to those questions. Always add. Why? Because as I said, because if you want to establish and verify that this evidence is credible beyond any doubt, you have to ask questions. However, you can't lead the witness. Because if you lead the witness, actually, as they said, you're shooting yourself in your own foot over here. What you're trying to accomplish, you're undermining. Therefore, it's not valid. The Talmud tells us in 2 locations that a judge who renders a truthful verdict, he's God's partner in creation. That's the Gemara says in 2 locations. But the Gemara, when it uses the term, it says, a judge who issues a verdict, which is emes lamito. Emes in Hebrew means truth. Emes is truth. Lamito. On the ultimate level. So the commentators on the page asks, it's truth. The judges who issue a truthful verdict, God's, what do you mean? The ultimate truth. Either it's truth or it's not ultimate truth. What's the ultimate truth? So Tosfos, which is the commentator on the page, answers, let's say you've gone through, interrogated the witnesses, and they meet all the criteria of what? Of credible witnesses. But the judge has a certain sense, as we say, it doesn't smell right. The judge doesn't feel comfortable. There's something he feels is not truthful about this. He can't put his finger on it. If the judge feels that way, he has to dismiss the whole thing. He cannot judge on that case. So it's not enough to meet the criteria of what truth is. It has to be the ultimate, that you're satisfied after everything's said and done. You feel these witnesses are credible beyond any doubt. You have no question. You don't suspect that maybe there's some shenanigans going on behind the scenes. Only then, now you can issue the verdict. Because only then are you in the place of God. Only then does God convene with you, because you're representing celestial justice on the terrestrial level. That's why you must meet that criteria of truth. It's not enough to be truthful, it has to be ultimate, the ultimate truth. Just as God, when he judges, there's no question. He understands exactly, you have to feel the same way. And if you don't feel that way, if that's the case, you're not qualified to issue a verdict on that particular situation. Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, had a level of genius, I mean, not to be believed. He himself, he was a Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin, which produced in the 1800s all the greatest Torah scholars, and he mentored them. Until today, the methodology which you study the Talmud, that analytical approach is his, what he put in place. And eventually he became the Brisker Rav, because his father, there was a community in Belarus, it was called Brisk. He became the rabbi there, and that was his last position in his life. And his level of genius is not to be believed. For instance, let's say a person authored a work on the Talmud, and he wrote on 50 different subject matters. It's not to be believed what this is. And then the person comes to him and speaks to him for 5 minutes and tells him over an insight in the Talmud. 5 minutes. He wrote 50, and this person authored a work, 50 subject matters in the Talmud. After he spoke to that person for 5 minutes, he could tell you every one of those 50 subject matters exactly what he said. Because he understood his pattern of thinking, what bothered him, what he answered, back and forth, all 50 subject matter. Come out, you have a book, 300 pages, every subject matter, he could tell you exactly what what's bothering the man, what he answered, whether it was correct, whether it wasn't correct. You understand what this is? It's not to be believed. His grasp, his ability to be able to understand the person who was core, and because he knew the whole Torah, the whole Talmud, he knew what he would ask from and how he'd ask and how he understood it. Now he didn't understand it. There's a story with him. He was a young man, and he was already at the age of maybe 30. He already was a leading lecturer in Volozhin. And in Russia during the Tsarist government, you were conscripted to the Russian army, and there was no exemption. So if that's the case, how do you run a yeshiva? So every year they would pay off the person who would come and check whether they sent enough students to be drafted. So they would always pay off the person who came from the government. So eventually it reached a point, the minister of the defense reached a point, he says, he says, I'm not going to tolerate any longer. Even if I have to shut down all these institutions, I will shut them down, and reached a very serious moment. And they pleaded this and that. They said nothing. Either you offer as many draftees have to go, otherwise we're shutting you down. They didn't know what it would destroy, because they would take the core, and if there's no core, everything would collapse. And they tried to reason, they tried this, they raised the amount, the bribe, nothing helped. So Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, I told you he was a genius of geniuses. He says, let me do it. Let me try to work it out. He goes to the Minister of Defense, and he says to him, and it's in the middle of July, and he shows up in a fur coat. Hear this? A fur coat in Europe was called a pelts. That's what it's called. So the minister looks at him like he's out of his mind. It's 100 degrees outside. You're wearing a fur coat. He says, why are you wearing a coat? He says, you know why? Because we're expecting a snowstorm tomorrow. He says, a snowstorm? Are you out of your mind? He says, yeah, a snowstorm. He said, and Rav Chaim Brisker says, I'll make a 20,000 ruble wager with you that it's going to snow tomorrow. And we're going to have a snowstorm. So he says, if it snows tomorrow, I'll give you 20,000. And I'll exempt you people from the draft. And if it doesn't snow, then you're going to give me the 20,000 ruble. Okay. They go. And Reb Chaim Brisker goes back. He says, I already solved it. He said, how did you solve it? He said, wait till tomorrow. Next day comes. Of course, it doesn't snow. It's 100 degrees outside. So the Minister of Defense, he takes 20,000 rubles from Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. And he says, okay. So Reb Chaim says, I guess you won the wager. You won the bet. And he gives him the 20,000 rubles. Okay. Now, day later, he goes and he says, again, I would like to ask that the students should be exempt from the draft. He says, no problem. They're exempt. How do you work it out? Because the Torah tells us that if a judge has any level of conflict of interest, because of that conflict, he really doesn't see straight. He changes his position. It's called bribery. When you bribe a judge, the judge has one mindset, the same mindset as the person who offered him the bribe. So since Reb Chaim gave him that money, it was only a way to get him the money. Once he took that money, he had him in his pocket. That's how we did it. And from then on going forward, again, they were exempt from the draft. And they agreed to take the payments, the bribes. So when you ask questions, you have to know how to ask the question, what question to ask. And if you have like a wily witness, he could pick up on it. So sometimes the judges themselves aren't really that adept. They may be knowledgeable, but they're not, they don't have the street smarts. And if you don't have the street smarts, these people could outwit you many times over. So therefore, don't lead the witness, because otherwise you're undermining whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, Rabbi, but so quickly by way of there's such a thing called planned obsolescence where products are made to go bad because then the company can sell another one. So God had a chance to make his world a certain way that didn't need the justice system, and it didn't need measuring, and it didn't need this. Everybody could have been perfect. But we seem to be further and further away every time and get worse and worse. So what's God's point here, if there's an answer?
There is an answer. Okay, there's a better question. If you believe, which is basic belief, that a human being is a composite of the spiritual and the physical, that the essence of the human being is a soul, what did God have to create us as physical beings? Well, we have illness and we have pain and suffering. Just create a soul. It's not subject to all this kind of environment and be part of eternity. Create a perfect world. What do we need this imperfect world? I mean, you're asking on an exaggerated level. People do the wrong thing. They lie. They undermine. They're deceptive. They're this. All these shortcomings. Create a perfect world. So the answer is, this is the answer. There's a basic principle. We read in Pirkei Avos, Lefum Tzara Agro, that when you challenge, the more difficult the challenge, and despite the challenge, you succeed, you're a beneficiary of a greater degree of compensation. Why? Because if a person does something naturally, it's not an indication of any dedication if there's no sacrifice. But if a person is willing to sacrifice for a reason, that means he values for what he's sacrificing for. Person has a challenge to do a mitzvah, to steal or not to steal. And it's so tempting and could change his life for the better. And despite that, he does not steal. Why didn't he steal? Because God says you shouldn't steal. That means he's willing to give up all the gravy and all what he thought would be very positive for him, which would put him on a whole different level, not to cross that line, not to transgress the word of God. God said, if you're willing to give that all up for me, you know what you deserve? You deserve endlessly more, whatever that is. Therefore, the greater the challenge, the greater is the reward for that reason. I'm giving it to you on we'll start there. That's the concept. If man would naturally do everything right, perfectly, why is he deserving at anything? It's like you create a robot, and the robot functions the way you programmed it. Is anything attributed to the robot? So if you create a soul, that soul based on its makeup naturally does only the will of God. Why is that soul worthy of any level of reward? That soul, anything it did has nothing to do with the soul itself. But if a human being, that soul is put into a body, and everything in life is a choice, and the choice is determined by the person himself, whether I do or don't do, whether it's something which is minor or major, doesn't make a difference. Whatever I do, whatever I live, whatever I think, every level of my function, other than my heart beating and my lungs working and my circulatory system going, that's all up to me, how I want it to go. Therefore, as a result of that, every aspect of our life is determined by our choices. If you make the right choice, why did you make that right choice? Because you chose to do so. Why did you choose to do the wrong thing? You chose to do the wrong thing because you chose to do so. So every aspect of our behavior is attributed to ourselves, positive and negative. Therefore, man is a beneficiary of his own level of accomplishment. That's why he's deserving. And therefore, the greater the sacrifice, the greater the challenge, it causes he should be even more worthy because that shows his dedication to his maker, and he put him in that position, so he should be the beneficiary of the ultimate level of reward, which is eternity.
I'm starting to want. Oh, sorry.
Right.
You put it back on.
Yes.
Oh, my concern or question is that it seems to me that God is really interested in the quality of the soul's status, and he's suggesting, again, this is anthropomorphic, meaning it's on a human level, is saying, I want my souls to be better and closer to me, and the only way the soul improves is to be put into the body of the human for testing. What I want to ask you is, it's sort of like a father throws a ball at a little kid, keeps dropping it and dropping it and dropping it. Suddenly he's getting better, his skills get better, he tries harder, he thinks better, and now he's catching the ball and throwing it back. So God is measuring, in my mind, I could be wrong here, God measures his souls, and he's saying, I want my souls to be even better, and the only way those souls go to the proving ground is in the body of the human, and they improve, and then they come back. Is that
correct? Sort of correct. But let me. What you said is exactly 100% correct. However, to understand it a little more clearly, why did God have to create the world, a human being? Period. Why does he want the soul to be a better soul? First of all, every soul, when it comes to this world, comes purely as potential. It's like a child. An infant is born. The person doesn't remain an infant. There's development. That development is part of the DNA and the potential of that child to grow into an adult and to function based on exactly what's contained within that child at the time of birth. Go to become a toddler, an adolescent, an adult, to age, all the way through. Intellectually, everything. The capacity, something doesn't come later. It's all based on what initially is programmed within the potential of that person. Every soul has a maximum potential. And you're here to that, to address it, to develop it, perfect, refine, and advance that and bring it to its level of its fullest potential. And these are what the challenges are there to bring it there. It's like I give you a piece of rough diamond. You cut it and you polish it, and if the potential is phenomenal. But if you're not a good cutter, what do? You destroy it. Not only don't you perfect it, you destroy it. So if the diamond cutter is a precision diamond cutter from the best, the end result is going to be something one of a kind. Every soul is that diamond. It's a diamond in the rough. In the rough, each of us has the ability to be the ultimate precision diamond cutter. That's up to us. You want to be sloppy, you want to neglect it. The end of the day, which is after 120 years, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, what that's going to look like, it's the way you cut the diamond, the way you polish the diamond. That's the way that soul is going to look. But whatever advancement it has, it's only due to what you did. That was your input in it. And the more perfect it is, that level of perfection is attributed to you because that was your initiative which brought that up. And if you destroyed it or you damaged it, it was only because you didn't deal with it as you should have dealt with it. That's the concept. But why did God want this? Because God wants that man should be the ultimate beneficiary of good, which is having a relationship with him. And to have the relationship with him, you have to achieve a certain level of what? Of advancement, of accomplishment. Therefore, he gives us all these challenges that it should be our accomplishment to be worthy of having a relationship with him. That's in a nutshell.
Thank you, Rabbi. Take care. Be well.
No.